Well, Jeff, we're doing our second video on the first principle. And you want to tell everyone what that first principle is?
Well, the first principle was that our brains will intentionally prioritize dealing with fear over everything else in life.
So, like the analogy of seeing a snake, we're going to take care of that survival skill.
Mm-hmm.
But I also like your analogy of being on a roller coaster, ready to come down the hill, and you couldn't do any higher level math at that moment. You know?
Right.
We are totally in survival mode.
And of course, the implications are that when we're not aware of or intentionally dealing with our fears, that they end up functioning, we think, in the background, but in reality, they are actually impacting all of our thought processes.
So when we introduced the idea of the principles, they came about because of our work with families for many, many years. We were seeing certain things play out. Mm-hmm. And we introduced this by saying, when we walked into families, we saw certain things, we always knew that there was an issue. Mm-hmm. And we were able to identify with this principle 8 red flags.
Yep.
So what stands out with you and when we talk about the red flags? What?
Well, the big one that stands out for me is when I ask the question of parents, how do you deal with fear in your life when you can't make the trigger go away? You know, for instance, if you know you made a mistake on your job today and you're going to have to go in and face your boss tomorrow and you know he's going to be mad. How do you deal with that fear that you feel overnight? And the particular answer that I get a lot of times is, well, why should I deal with that fear? I can't make the trigger go away. It's going to happen anyway.
Yeah, I'm just going to go to work and so it's almost like I'm in this time suspended atmosphere where I can't do anything about it but really worry and run all these scenarios through my head of the possibilities. And by the time I walk into work tomorrow, my brain's going to be fried.
Right, so I might as well ignore it.
Yeah.
And just, see what I get with tomorrow. Of course, it completely ignores the first skill that we're born into this world with. Mm. The one that most of us, we forget or we fail to notice. When we're first born into this world, our first instinct, because it's very scary, we're brought into the cold, light, harsh realities where we were, cuddled as far as temperature goes and moisture, and we didn't even really have to eat or breathe for ourselves.
Just free floating.
Then you're out there and suddenly all these functions start kicking in, and you're in a very cold, loud, harsh world. And the first thing babies do is?
They cry.
They cry. And when they cry like that, what that is, that's the number one technique. What we do is we verbalize our fear. And with an infant, of course, it's crying. Mm-hmm. And it's supposed to be directed at a trusted adult, namely mom. And what we do is we take that infant baby and we put it up on mom's chest where mom can begin to talk to it and soothe it, and those fear levels go down. Mm-hmm. We forget that the first technique that humans have for dealing with fear is to verbalize it, to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Now, in an infant's case, it's very automatic and it's very limbic brain because they don't have a lot of front brain kicking at the time. But the point is, once you start dealing with fear that way, as your front brain comes online, as you begin to start having thinking, then you start to put your fear into words. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do that, then you lose your first and foremost, your biggest ability to process fear. Yeah. And when people say to me, why should I talk about my fear when I can't make the trigger go away anyway? That tells me that they're not separating out their fear from the trigger that's causing, the environmental trigger that's interacting with their beliefs that's causing that fear.
Yeah.
And that can be a problem in a family system. I know back, I remember seeing videos telling us that men that we were never supposed to bring our work problems home.
Yeah.
as if we were just supposed to turn them off.
Yes.
And then come transition home. I'm not sure that works. That led rise, I think that contributed quite heavily to the cocktail hour and to, the stop for a beer on the way home.
Well, and if you think of it that way too, so we have parents who don't bring their work home, but then they sit down at the table and say to the kids, well, how was your day at school? With the expectation the kid's going to be able to talk about something the parents can't do.
Yeah. Yep. So one of the red flags that frequently comes up for me is when we walk into families and everybody's angry.
Oh, angry, yes. It's snippy. We have some snippy. And then the dads, we've had dads that get up like, I don't want to talk about that subject, I'm going to leave, and all those threats of...
Well, the anger, an angry family is very often a symptom of a family with an inability to actually deal with fear. And so they end up turning it into man without even thinking, unintentionally.
Yeah. We have walked into some homes where everybody's just angry. Even the animals. You know how often we go in and the dogs are totally out of control. We know that's a sign.
Yep. Snapping, barking, disobeying.
Disobeying. Yeah.
So what about you? What's one of the red flags that you see?
Oh, well, there's two that I kind of mingle together, because one is the parent who dismisses the kid's fear, and the other one who minimizes it.
So what does dismissing look like?
Just go play. There's nothing to be afraid of. Just go.
Yeah, that's the big one, isn't it? Nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
What are you afraid of that for?
Yeah.
That's dumb.
It is.
You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Just totally eliminate or act like the child's feelings of fear don't exist.
Yeah. And then the minimizing, that's not a big deal. Yeah, so it might be scary. But you can go play, you can get over it, you can do it, instead of just being with that child for a bit.
You still got to perform.
You still have to. Yes.
Buck up. Pull yourself up by your
yes.
bootlaces and, perform.
Yeah, it used to be much more, society with the shift in the past was about males, buck up, get strong. But now females are in the front too. Right. There's you're strong, you can do it, you can take on X, Y, and Z.
So it doesn't act like the fear is bad or wrong. It just says you should be able to handle it.
Yeah. It's not that big of a deal.
And what's really traumatizing sometimes is when these statements, the minimization and the dismissal, follows a child's natural attempt to talk about the things that scare them.
Yeah. They're really taking it to the parent and say, this is my fear, and the parent saying, no, you can't bring it to me. Yeah. It's not important.
One of the other triggers I see is when parents are not able to comfort their children in their fear. A lot of discussions, a lot of statements like, well, she wakes up in the middle of the night, there's nothing I can do about it, so I don't know what to do. We don't do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, there's that piece about what's going on with the parent. They don't want to, or don't see themselves even capable of helping their child with the fear. And then sometimes parents aren't able to read the child's distress and find the fear to even comfort them. They only see it as a behavior problem, not something that comes out of emotional distress.
And there certainly are a lot of behaviors that stem from fear, aren't there?
Aren't they? But I think that for me, the big ones that we've seen in families are the parents who try to remove the triggers or restrict interactions, actions, activities. So we have, people have called it lawnmower parents. Recently, someone else called it a bulldozer parent, where they literally were bulldozing the world so that the child never felt any stress. And we see all this going on.
These are the parents that go in and yell at the teachers.
Yes.
For giving material that's too hard for their child or that sort of thing.
They say even college professors are getting calls from parents saying, "You've got to give my kid a better grade. They did the best they could."
I can remember a time when I was I was running a dairy department in a grocery store, and I had a 16-year-old boy that was working for me, and you know, I yelled at him. I told him he was doing this wrong, and it's the third time I've told him, and that he needed to shape up, or I would have to ask that he leave the department because I need this work done. And the next day, I got a call from his mom telling me that I couldn't yell at him. It wasn't fair. I was like, well, is it fair that the work I need done isn't done? That's an example of
Right.
trigger removal. They're trying to make, obviously I scared their son. In this case, it was good that he must have talked to her about it, but then it was bad that she ended up thinking that the solution was to remove that trigger.
Yeah, she didn't help him manage it and figure out a way to come to you or solve the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the restricting your life to avoid fear is damaging too. That's, I think of that of like people who, they would love to sing, but they're afraid that they're not going to sound well. I've struggled with this myself, and then so they just don't sing.
Yeah.
They have options to go out to join a choir or join a band or praise team, and they say no. Because their assumption is it's too scary. It's I might not be able to do it.
Well, it's a good thing I don't have a desire to jump out of airplanes because I have such fear of heights, So at least mine go together, that.
Yeah, the restriction thing, that's problematic when you start taking away things that you do like to do. I've heard people say, well, I feel like going fishing. I'd like to go fishing, but you know what? I hate the mosquitoes so bad. I'm not even going to go. And instead of dealing with the fear, you can put on netting, you can, bug spray. Yeah. I know people that even smoke cigars when they go fishing. You can do stuff about the fear and still get through the thing you like, but to actually cut down, and of course traumatize kids, to cut down your life. Okay? If we're not aware of it, traumatized kids will just not even try things that they would secretly like to do because they're afraid of failing.
It brings me, I came from West Virginia, and one of the stories from small town West Virginia was a lady had gone into church, and it was a country church, and her dog had followed her and gone into church too. And she was so embarrassed she didn't go back. It's like she gave up going to church because her dog followed her in.
Trigger avoidance. Make that I'm just not going to even deal with that fear.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the other red flags when we walk in is that when we talk to parents and they can't even verbalize their own fears. They can't talk about them. They're just plain missing that skill.
Sometimes they'll talk about things that make them mad. But going to fear and going to sadness are two of the hardest things that the parents and everybody it seems like anymore. It's just really hard for them. But they will go to what makes them mad. So, on that note, the elements are really helpful, but we're not teaching elements right now.
And of course, there's parents who have that compulsion to control everything in the environment.
And especially with the families that have kids with early trauma, control is overwhelming. They're battling for control while the kids are battling for control. And your term is, it's a fear fest.
It's a fear fest, yeah.
When we go in and we have to try to break those patterns and get in and help them see where the fear is and the control. And it's that bit of muck is really difficult.
Yeah. And for families to begin to heal this first principle, that their brains are going to be dealing with fear first above everything else.
Right.
It's important to learn how to do it.
Yeah. Well, especially when we're talking about the families who have children with early trauma, they come to the home with a lot of fear. And the family may not have had so much fear until the child joined them, and then it just multiplies daily, hourly sometimes. And as we help them see that this is about fear, and that can't say it's a simple task, but it's a task that they can do. It's something they could do
Ooh.
to work on.
Actually, it's a task that they have to do.
All right, have to
do. I mean, again, the number one skill, the one most of us anymore are not very good at, is talking about the things that make us afraid. I mean, we pay a lot of money to therapists so we can go and talk to them about the things that scare us in life. But we should have that skill available to us at any time, whether it's paid or whether it's non-paid. We should be able to verbalize it. We should be able to put those fears into words with our frontal cortex and allow our frontal cortex to start making sense of them. And that allows us to deal with the fear separate from the trigger.
Right, and on that note, Dan Siegel has some good stuff about the name it and tame it.
Yep, name it, tame it. So here's what's missing so often. If I were to ask you, Faye, and you may ask me afterwards, if I were to ask you, what do you do to deal with fear in your life when you can't make the trigger go away? What's some of your techniques?
Well, the first thing that my brain automatically does now after all this, I'm able to name my fear. Okay, so this is what I'm afraid of, and if there is any action or that I can take, then I can do that. Then I like to I like to clean. I like to go for walks. I watch old TV programs. Black and white's better. Community aid, all those special shopping deals and thrift stores.
So it's funny how when you talk about that, your face breaks into a smile when you talk about these things.
Well,
and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about things that just you can do that make your brain smile on the inside.
That's where I like the research around dopamine, and that's not the point of this video, but just thinking about those things start increasing the dopamine production, and you do feel better.
And what we've seen over the years is that people who are refusing to recognize this first principle, oftentimes their entire family environment becomes geared towards, mindlessly trying to handle the levels of fear that everyone's feeling.
Yeah, and then that's where we see the restrictions, the isolation, and all that. I think when we first start working with families, you typically assign them to make a list of 10, 50, however many things that they enjoy doing. And from the start, a lot of them struggle.
And that's because, again, they're not consciously and effectively utilizing this principle.
So as we end this video, tell us your means to manage fear.
Oh, I've got a million of them over the years. I read Western books. I mean, really, the dumber the better. I read Western books. I like science fiction shows and movies, superhero movies. I play tennis when I can. I kayak. I ride bicycle. I don't think, especially in the years that I was dealing as a therapist, that I could have survived the stress of those years without having a long list of ways that I could just make my brain feel happy. For me, a very powerful one right from the start is prayer. And that's verbalizing those fears. That's me putting those fears into words to God. Yeah. And it's just powerful.
I liked during our time traveling to families and were those breaks of going into a thrift store or to the bread store or to one of the cheaper grocery stores. Just that gave a chance to drain off some of that stuff. And
a time when your brain goes and stops feeling afraid and starts feeling happy.
Yeah, and with that, the brain flexibility, that we can shift emotional states and not stay stuck. When we started this, we talked about what happens if you know you're going to be in trouble tomorrow at work. And if you stay stuck in that emotional distress for all that length of time till you go to work tomorrow, you're going to have the adrenaline, the cortisol, and you're going to be in bad shape by the time.
And it's not going to affect anything as far as your boss goes.
It's not going to change the outcome at all. But if you can teach your brain to be flexible, to move in and out of emotions, then you're going to be healthier, even if the boss yells at you tomorrow.
A win.
It is. Thank you. I think I'm looking forward to the next video because now we're going to talk about the positive ways to manage this, even though we've given them a few tips today.
Okey-doke.
All right. Thank
Thanks a lot.
you.